Bienvenidos a su programa de Cabeza con Andrés Roemer. Hoy tendremos aquí en este estudio un gran debate, monogamia versus poligamia, la parte social de la monogamia versus la parte sexual de la monogamia. 4 expertos. ¿Usted qué opina? Quédese aquí con nosotros. Comenzamos. It's a great honor to have the 4 of you here today at ADN 40 de Cabeza. Hello, everybody. How are you?
Good.
Hey.
It's beautiful to see you again, all of you. You know, I would like to start inviting you to tell us about you, your credentials. Everybody, everywhere, all the time are debating about if we're monogamous or polygamous or whatever. But today we have here the luck, the fortune, to have 4 experts that have been doing research for years, that have data, experiments. So, with your own words, Helen, welcome. 30 seconds. What are your credentials? Who are you?
I'm Dr. Helen Fisher. I'm a biological anthropologist. I study love. I'm Senior Research Fellow at the Kinsey Institute. I'm Chief Science Advisor to the Internet dating site Match.com, where I do their science on 45,000 Americans. And I've written 6 books on romantic love, among them Anatomy of Love, Why We Love, and Why Him, Why Her. But I think I might be best qualified for this because I'm an identical twin. And I've always been terribly interested in the biology of who we are.
That last part of identical twin will be difficult to beat, eh? Congratulations. Thank you, Helen. Marty, welcome.
Hi, so glad to be with you. My name is Marty Hazelton. I'm a professor at UCLA. I am in the psychology department and also a professor of communication and in the Institute for Society and Genetics. I've been studying human mating for my entire career, and I've been interested in love and long-term bonds. So this is definitely a topic about which I have some opinions that I'm happy to share. I wrote a book that came out in 2018 called Hormonal. That's about the hormonal underpinnings of our mating psychology and women's mating psychology in particular.
Robert Sapolsky.
I am Robert Sapolsky. I'm a professor of biology, neurology, and neurosurgery at Stanford University. I'm also a research associate at the National Museums of Kenya. And let's see, author of a number of books, most recently Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst. And I've spent decades going back and forth between being a lab neurobiologist and studying baboons out in the Serengeti in East Africa.
My friend
Thank
David.
you.
My name is David Buss. I'm a professor of evolutionary psychology at the University of Texas. I've been studying human mating, psychology of human mating for probably more than 30 years now, and published maybe, I'm guessing, 200 to 300 scientific articles on the topic, as well as matching Helen on 6 books. Probably the most well-known and the most relevant for this topic is my book, The Evolution of Desire, Strategies of Human Mating.
Thank you very much to the 4 of you. The rules of the game are very easy. Each of you will have 2 minutes. I will have to be the referee. The first 2 minutes, you have to tell me why you think the way you think. What's your statement of purpose? What's your opening statement? After that, you will have 1 minute to say why the adversaries have committed a crime against logic. Where or why are they wrong in their opening statement? Later, I will ask you a question. You will have 1 minute to answer, and then we'll have 2 minutes just to talk between you or to make your conclusions. Thank you very much. 2 minutes, David. You are telling us that we're polygamous. Why?
Well, I think the issue needs to be reframed slightly. Clearly, if you look across cultures and at human behavior, humans do engage in both monogamous mating as well as sometimes polygamous mating, that is multiple mating. But I think the question is not whether we're one or the other, but rather, do we have an evolved psychology of multiple mating, that is mating with multiple partners, in addition to our proclivity for pair bonding, attachment, and monogamous mating? And I think the answer to that question, do we have an evolved psychology of multiple mating, is unquestionably yes. And I think that there are two sources of evidence that we could highlight today. One is psychological and the other is behavioral. Psychologically, we know a great deal now about desires in human mating, and people do desire more than one partner. Sometimes they, for example, have sexual fantasies about multiple partners. Sometimes when they're in an existing long-term presumptively monogamous relationship, they have fantasies about other partners, both sexual fantasies and, importantly, fantasies about switching partners. That is, divesting themselves of their current partner and switching to a better partner, a partner who is more compatible, more alluring, higher in mate value, or whatever. And so we have these desires. Importantly, individuals in presumptively monogamous relationships do engage in extramarital copulations. That is, they have affairs in English language. They have affairs, and in the case of women, 70% of women fall in love with their affair partners. So we know behaviorally that people have a very strong desire for and engage in multiple mating. I would also point to the fact that in Western cultures, 85% of all individuals have had at least one romantic breakup.
Marty, welcome. It's your time.
I think that humans have evolved to form pair bonds. And I think that there are a number of lines of evidence for this. So one clue is the fact that our offspring are so heavily dependent on us for such a long period of time. So for one person, for a woman to care for kids who are dependent on her for 1 or 2 decades, some might even say 3 decades or more. But for a woman to do that all by herself, it seems implausible. It seems implausible that throughout evolutionary history, there wouldn't have been something that co-evolved with that long lifespan for human offspring that allowed for this to happen. And often it's the case that women have not only an offspring who has a very long juvenile period, but they have multiple of those offspring. So it doesn't seem very plausible that we would have evolved this characteristic in humans if there wasn't some sort of support for it. And that support probably comes from the individual, for a woman, her mate, who has the most stake in the fitness of that offspring, and that is the dad. Nobody has more interest in that offspring other than the mom. The dad has interest in seeing that offspring survive and reproduce, make it to reproductive maturity, him or herself. In addition to that, humans are very concerned about their partners straying. So we have intense sexual and emotional jealousy. This is something that David has studied for many years. And we wouldn't have that if it weren't functional in some way, because it's extraordinarily costly. So people kill each other over sexual jealousy. So there's something about a partner, and there's something about one other person. This is also captured in the experience of romantic love, which is very much an intense focus on one person. So why would we have all these qualities if we didn't evolve to pair bond?
Bob.
Well, let's see. I hope you are not going to throw me off of the show because I'm going to be a classic academic and that I'm going to say yes and no at the same time. I think we are not a monogamous species, but at the same time, I think we are not a classic polygamous species. When you look at social primates, you can see that we have coevolution of brain and behavior and physiology and genome and such. And among the social primates, in most cases, they come in one of two flavors. They are either emphatically a monogamous species, and South American marmosets are a classic example, or they are a textbook example of a polygamous species, baboons, who I study being an example. And as a measure of the coevolution, you could introduce me to a new species of primate I've never seen before, and I could just look at an adult male and an adult female and tell you, are they monogamous or polygamous? There are dramatic differences. When you look at polygamous primate species, males are a lot bigger than females. They weigh a lot more. They have distinctive secondary sexual characteristics, colorful facial things, or the length of their canines. There's reliable differences, sexual differences in lifespan, in metabolic rate. Look at the relative size of a male's testicles, and you can tell if he is from a monogamous or polygamous species. Sperm count. Look at the tendency of the female to give birth to twins, how regularly that's the case. You can tell the same thing. And in terms of behavior, if it is a species in which females do all the child care, you were looking at a polygamous one. If you're looking at one where it's divided about 50-50. And then finally, a whole bunch of genetic disorders that are characteristic of either polygamous or monogamous species. So where are we? We humans, by every single one of those measures, are about halfway in between. We're not a classical monogamous. We're not a classical polygamous. What we are is terribly evolutionarily confused. And this is something that any poet or divorce lawyer could tell you.
Helen.
Well, thank you. I'm going to start off with a short story. It's a true story. I was walking in the highlands of New Guinea, and I was talking with a man who had 3 wives. So I asked him, how many wives would you like to have? And there was this long pause, and I thought, is he going to say 5? Is he going to say 10? Is he going to say 25? And he leaned towards me and he said, none. 86% of human societies permit a man to have several wives, polygyny. 86% of human cultures permit a man to have several wives. But when you look carefully in those cultures, only about 5 to 10% of men actually have several wives. It's a real toothache. You got to have a lot of money, a lot of goats, a lot of cows, a lot of chicken to get women to share your bed. We are basically a pair bonding animal. 97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. Human beings do. Monogamy. Mono means one, and gamy means spouse. One spouse, one socially sanctioned, obvious-looking spouse. This is not to suggest that we are sexually faithful to that partner. I've looked at adultery in 40 societies. Certainly, David has too. And it's very common around the world. So I would say that our basic human reproductive strategy is what I call a dual strategy or a mixed strategy of pair bonding with one partner and some adultery on the side. As a matter of fact, I've looked at over 80 societies for the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations from 1947 to 2011. And we tend to have a series of partnerships and also adultery on the sides. So I think that we have evolved a mixed reproductive strategy of serial social monogamy, serial social pair bonding, and clandestine adultery.
Wow, thank you very much. Bob, now you have 1 minute, please, to tell us if Marty or Helen have something that there is a crime against logic, something that you would like to change.
Well, most definitely not. And I think what was implicit in what Marty said was variation. She's saying tends to humans, typically, whatever. Helen making it more explicit in the notion of a mixed strategy, a dual strategy, a dual reproductive strategy in humans. And I think what this does is reflect just how much we are a species at the intersection of the 2 domains. And I think exactly the points that are brought up, the distinction between social monogamy and sexual monogamy, the distinction between what a society says it believes in and what its people actually do, the distinction between what people will condemn morally and what they will do if nobody is looking or if nobody else other than this one other person is looking. I think all of these are ways of summarizing this confusion. So
thank you very much, Bob. Marty, what do you think about your adversaries of what they said?
Oh, this is tough because I think we mostly agree.
I agree with you.
I just want to echo what Helen was saying about the dual mating strategy. One of the core phenomena that got me interested in hormones and the hormonal underpinnings of women's desires is that something that we documented in my lab a decade and a half ago, which was to find that during the ovulatory phase of the cycle, the most fertile phase of the cycle, women experienced increases in attraction to men other than their romantic partner. And that was particularly true if their romantic partners were not the sexiest guys around. So it was as if women are putting a premium on sexual attractiveness, and then they're engaging in selective attraction during those most fertile days of the cycle. And that might actually be part of this clandestine sexual psychology that gets some good genetic material on the side while potentially maintaining a long-term relationship with somebody who's none the wiser.
Thank you. David.
Yes. Also, I think there's a huge amount of agreement among us. But here's what I would say. I'll try to get the small parts where we might disagree. Okay. One is that I think that both Marty and Helen basically support my position. I think we all agree that there is pair bonded mating. We have adaptations for pair bonding, attachment, et cetera, with one person. The issue is, do we have an evolved psychology of multiple mating with multiple partners in addition to that pair bonded psychology? I think the evidence is overwhelmingly the yes. And if I could, and I agreed with 99% of what Dr. Sapolsky said, but I disagree with his use of the term confusion. I think that's actually a confusing way to put it. I think the way I would say is we have a menu of mating strategies that include pair bonding, include polygamy, include affairs on the side, include serial mating, and include mate switching. And it's which elements of that menu we select depend on a variety of circumstances.
Thank you. I will ask each of you one question if you want to answer it. If not, talk about whatever you want for 1 minute. But I mean, following what you have said, I will start with you, David. If I understood correct, in your first intervention, you mentioned that a woman fell in love sometimes or very often with their affairs, with their partners. If I understood correctly, is that men are very different than women in that sense?
Yes, and that's an important point. There is a huge sex difference here. Approximately 30 to 35% of men fall in love with their affair partner and engage in mate switching of a sort. 70% of women fall in love with their affair partner. And so I think the function of affairs in part is what Marty suggested, possibly genetic material. But I think the mate switching function is actually the most compelling reason for why women have affairs.
Helen, my question for you is, what could be now like the kind of education for public policy, for emotional intelligence education, to understand that we could be couples and we can be in love and you're for me, you're for you, but I could be unfaithfully sexually, and more after what David mentioned, that 30% of men could fall in love with extramarital sexual, or 70% woman. How can we elaborate on this in terms of public policy and public education?
Well, I've studied polyamory. These are people who have one central partner and have a lot of sex and romance on the side. 67% of Americans think that's perfectly fine, but only 6% have ever done it. We're not built for that. I really liked it when Marty's talked about jealousy. We've evolved a huge number of psychological brain pathways to try to sustain the pair bond, and yet we don't do it, and for good Darwinian reasons. But I just would like to go into, you're asking about the future. Honestly, I'm not interested in public policies as much as I am in human trends. And there's something that I call slow love. I've looked in 45,000 American singles. And as it turns out, what we're really seeing is a low, in the 1950s, a woman married around age 20 and married around age 23. Today, they're marrying at age 28 and almost age 30. We're seeing a real extension of the pre-commitment stage of partnerships. And that means that the later you marry, the more likely you are to remain together. It may be simple social trends that lead to more stable partnerships.
Thank you very much, Helen. Mark, you mentioned attractiveness and the opportunities of having these sexual affairs in relation with attractiveness, etc. David has a book of Why Women Have Sex, and he gives like, I don't know, 200 and I don't know how many reasons why yes, and men only has one, no? So my question for you is, it's really different, this monogamous, polygamous thing between men and women in the sexual arena?
You know, what would be the benefit for a woman of multiple mating? One possibility is that she gets better genes from an affair partner than she does from her primary partner. Another possibility, and that's, I think, been reasonably well supported, or at least the evidence is there that suggests that that might be the case. So, you know, but what might be the benefits for, and so another possibility is that by you know, she might get backup fertility from a second mate if she's not becoming pregnant with her primary mate. But what would be the benefits for a man? Just every additional sex partner with potentially another offspring. You know, so if a woman has sex with 5 partners over the course of 1 year, how many offspring is she going to produce? Maybe 1. If a man has sex with 5 women over the course of a year, how many offspring might he produce? He might produce 5. So there are just fundamental differences in the selection pressures that impinge on women and men because of the differences in the amount that they must invest in producing offspring.
Thank you very much.
For women, their investment is very high, and so they have to be super selective. For men, their investment can be low, and so they can engage in opportunistic mating.
Okay, each of you have 35 seconds just for conclusions, and please, I hope to see you and have you, the 4 of you, again in this program, because it's amazing to talk to all of you. Okay, David, please, conclusions.
Yes, I think my conclusion is, the question is, do people have an evolved psychology of multiple mating? And I think the answer to that is unquestionably yes. The evidence that Marty and Helen and Robert presented all support this view that in addition to our pair bonding and monogamous mating, we also have a psychology of multiple mating. Sometimes it's simultaneous, sometimes it's affairs, and sometimes it's sequential or serious.
Perfecto. Helen.
Serial, right? Serial.
Your conclusions, 35 seconds.
I study the brain in love. I and my colleagues have put over 100 people into a functional MRI brain scanner. And as it turns out, the basic brain system for romantic love lies at the very base of the brain, next to brain regions that orchestrate thirst and hunger. This is a universal human drive. People pine for love, they live for love, they kill for love, and they die for love. And it evolved probably 4.4 million years ago, along with pair bonding, so that we could focus our mating energy on one individual to raise babies together.
Robert, your conclusions.
Well, so on the average, we are about somewhere halfway between a polygamous and a monogamous species. But far and away, the single most interesting thing about that is the word average, because we all know individual variation runs the gamut from one extreme to the other. Extremely monogamous. We know people at the other end. The single most interesting thing to me, sort of as a nuts and bolts biologist, is understanding the biology of where those individual differences come from. Hormonal systems, vasopressin genes, and so on. That's what makes us interesting. We're varied individually.
Thank you. Marty, conclusions.
Well, I think that the phenomenology of love is a big hint here about what humans evolved to do. So when humans fall in love, we become, so, you know, there's this silly thing that we do where we're bumping into walls, we're obsessively focused on one person. And I would just advance the hypothesis that it is probably not possible for people to be in love with multiple partners at the same time. So this phenomenology is very much about you and another individual, so much so that we believe we have found our one and only, right? So there's a world full of billions of possibilities. But when we fall in love, we are so intensely focused on that one person that we believe that that person is our one and only. So there are hints in the phenomenology of love that tell us just how important pair bonding is for humans.
To the four of you, it's an honor to see you again. I love you. Thank you very much for being here at the program, and I hope to see you very soon in another program or in person.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
You too.
Same.
Bye-bye.
Great seeing you all.
Nice to see you.
Bye. El debate de la monogamia versus la poligamia es un debate que se ha llevado a través de los siglos, en todos los rincones de la humanidad. ¿Qué fue distinto en este programa? 4 expertos que han estudiado esto a fondo en diferentes universidades y con la ciencia actualizada llegan a las mismas conclusiones. ¿Qué opina? Muchas gracias. Los vemos el próximo domingo aquí con ustedes de Cabeza.